I'd like to discuss tonight the subject of the two silver trumpets. Maybe it's not a very well-known topic. It is covered in about 6 to 8 verses in the parsha, and I just found looking at it and looking into it to be absolutely fascinating. So there is a commandment for Moshe to make two silver trumpets for a very specific purpose. So Hashem commands Moshe and says to them, make for yourself shtei chatzotzot kesef, two silver trumpets, two silver uh, trumpets. The translation here says, have two silver trumpets made, but more accurately, it's asay lecha, make for yourself. And the sages actually learned from there that Moshe had to make it himself. It had to belong to him. It was not something that the community bought for him, even though it served a communal purpose, as we'll see in a moment. Um, and what else we're reading about is that they were mikshat haseotam, they were beaten, hammered work. Similar word used for when the menorah was made, so it was also hammered work. In other words, you didn't make pieces and solder them together, but actually took one bigger block and cut it down to the correct shape. What's the purpose of these trumpets? It says two things. Mikra ha'edah, calling the people together, summoning the community, Masa Machanot, and also to um, encourage the encampments to travel. So those were signals for assemblies as well as a signal to start marching. That's the purpose of these as commanded to Moshe. And it was a once-off commandment. So if you look at mitzvah listings, for example, you will not find it listed because it was a once-off commandment to Moshe at that specific time, and it served him during his lifetime, and that was it. And at the end of it all, because it was lecha, it was for you. They were hidden, dismantled. I don't know what happened, destroyed, whatever it may be. And now the Torah starts getting a bit more specific about how they're used. So if they're blown and in long blasts, then that's a sign that the entire congregation is going to assemble before the Oel Moed, the opening of the tent of meeting, the Oel Moed, where the Mishkan was located. And the plural here is tak'u bahein, to blow with them, which is translated here as when they're both blown. And tak'u is from the word tekiah, which we know from Yom Tov is a Rosh Hashanah, is the long blast. Im ba'achat yitkau, however, if only one of them is blown, then that's a call for the Nesi'im. Who are the Nesi'im? The Nesi'im are the heads of the 12 tribes. They call them here the chieftains, heads of the contingents. So that's literally what the Pasuk says. But the Nesi'im, there was one per tribe, one head of each tribe. And so there were 12. And they gathered when there was occasion for Moshe to want to gather the leadership of the Jewish people and obviously give them either, I don't know, seek the advice or instruct them to go back to their respective tribes and share a message. It doesn't say what that would be, but clearly, this is the divine commandment that was given to Moshe to make these. And Hashem says there will be occasions when you want to speak to the Nisi'im, the chiefs. There'll be occasions when you want to gather the entire Jewish community to the opening of a tent of assembly. I don't know how many of these assemblies took place. There's one that's specifically mentioned in the Torah, subsequent to the making of the trumpets, because there's a portion called Vayakhel. Vayakhel is about Moshe gathering, it says, the entire Jewish community, but at that point there wasn't yet an Ohel Moed because they hadn't built the Mishkan. In fact, the gathering was for the purpose of instructing them about it, so it didn't exist yet. But there is another portion that begins with General Assembly, where Hashem tells Moshe, Dabel Kol Adat Israel. It's the beginning of a portion of Kedoshim. And there he told, you got to gather the entire Jewish people. So there was at least one occasion recorded where he gathered all the people, and I don't I don't recall there being a written record in the Torah of the Nesi'im coming together. And these calls to assembly are via the long sound. So it's a tak'u, the tekiah, which we have here in the verb tak'u and yitka'u. However, when there were short blasts, that's teruah, then the divisions on the east start moving forward, and then there's a second teruah, and that's a sign for the southern camps to travel on. And so it was with the Teruah sound, that's a short blast sounds, that they traveled. A bit of debate among the commentaries because there were four encampments. You may recall this from a couple of weeks ago when we spoke about how the Jews encamped around the Mishkan, and there were kind of four flanks, four flags. So there were the east and the south, the west, and of course the north, and they traveled in their respective sections. Was there a shofar blast? Sorry, not a shofar, because this is a trumpets, not shofar. Was there a trumpet blast each time, or was it only for two of them? Is not clear. Then we have another occasion, and I think we're missing something here. Um, yes, there we go. So now we made the distinction between the sound for assembly and the sound for travel. Okay, when you want to gather the congregation, then you blow the long blasts, not the short ones. When you want to travel, then the order to travel, then that will be the rather short sounds. And what else do we learn here? We learn here that it was the Kohanim who actually blew the trumpets. It wasn't Moshe himself. It would have been quite difficult because there were two of them. It was he deputized to the Kohanim, and they blew those trumpets. And what else we told is this is an institution for all times throughout the ages. So the mitzvah of blowing trumpets for various occasions, assemblies, travel, and we'll see another couple of purposes for those trumpets shortly. That remained as a mitzvah for future generations. Those trumpets were Moshe's, they were his, and they were never used again. But they were able to make other trumpets subsequently that would be used for future generations. And then the next verse, we found another purpose for blowing those trumpets, and that's when you go to war. When you go to war against an aggressor, then you sound the short blasts so that you remembered before Hashem and He delivers you from your enemies. So that's v'hareotem b'chatzotzrot. That's the Teruah sound, hareotem, and then you are remembered niskatem. You remembered before Hashem, and you are saved from your enemies. And finally, the Torah gives us a further purpose. So we've had assembly, we've had travel, we've had war, and now we're going to be told there's another purpose, and that's the trumpets were actually blown at the time of offering of sacrifices, particularly on special occasions. So on joyous occasions, that's defined by the commentaries as Shabbos, the festivals and the new moon days. So the punctuation here doesn't go with the interpretation of the verse. You sound the trumpets over your burnt offerings and your sacrifices of well-being. And those are a reminder before Hashem that Hashem is God. So basically, we introduced to trumpets and to their respective sounds. And we told that there's two trumpets, Moshe makes them. We told how they're made. We are told that they are used for the purposes of gathering the people and travel. And then we told about the specific sounds. Assembly, depending on who you want to call, both trumpets if it's the entire people, and one trumpet if only the Nesi'im are to come forward. And then we have the Teruah sound for going out to travel as well as to war. And then we have the Tekiah sound once again when it comes to the sacrifices which were brought, particularly on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Now, let's just try and make some heads and tails out of this, particularly as we have two different kinds of sounds, and how does that all work? Why there's sometimes when you blow the Tekiah sound, and it's not just random, it's not just that, they have to be able to distinguish between them. So we are fortunately familiar with these sounds from the shofar blowing on Rosh Hashanah. Although this is not shofar, this is trumpets, silver trumpets. There is, but the names of the sounds are the same. So Tekiah, we know that very well. That's the long sound. Okay, symbolized here with that line. The two, the Teruah. There's a bit of a debate in halacha as to exactly how you do a teruah. The one opinion is that it is the kind of three blasts to which we actually don't call teruah, we call them shavarim, and that's just to distinguish them of the sound we call teruah, which is the tu, the very short blasts. And there's a lot of discussion in the Talmud as to which is the true truah. Excuse the alliteration, which is the true sound of the teruah. Is it what we call the shvarim? Is it what we call the teruah? Or is it a combination of both? So that's why in Shul, on Rosh Hashanah, you will hear the shvarim, the teruah, and then the shvarim truah combined. Actually, we do it in the other order. We do shvarim truah, and then shvarim, and then Teruah. But this is not Rosh Hashanah Shir, so let's not get bogged down into technicalities. However, what I'm going to say now has a lot of relevance to Rosh Hashanah as well, because what we need to do is we need to find a correlation between the sounds that are produced and the occasions when it's blown. So we need to understand what the meaning of these trumpet sounds are. And this was a fascinating kind of journey into the various commentaries and how they define, or rather not define, but explain the symbolism or the deeper meaning of the respective sounds of the trumpets, and that would apply to the shofar as well. This is Ramban, Nachmanides. So we're going, 12th century. And he says, when we're talking about the Tekiah, it's a sound of rachamim, it's a sound of compassion, of divine compassion. When we talk about teruah, the broken sound, that is more symbolic of din and of judgment. Now, think of the circumstances when we yontif, or if we want to gather the people, it's at peace. So we have the compassion, tekiah, long sound. Think of going out to war, and there you want God's attribute of judgment to be. I think I spelled that wrong. You want, or is it? Is there an E or isn't there an E judgment? Um, and uh, and uh, and yeah, so you want Hashem's attribute of din to be very much in controlling power when it is going out to war, even when you're traveling, where all kinds of dangers could come across. We know of Teruah outside the walls of Jericho. Well, the Kohanim circled Jericho for 7 days, and then the seventh day for 7 times, and then the walls collapsed. What they did was they had shofars with them, and the sound that they blew was the sound of judgment, the sound of din, the teruah, the broken sounds, rather than the tekiah, which is the sound of jubilation, the sound of rachamim, of compassion. Um, so this is Ramban's insight into it. Very similar, along the same lines, but there are different nuances in the interpretation, is a commentary made by a great rabbi. The book that he wrote in the Torah is called Melechet Machshevet, and his name is Moshe ben Gershon Chayfetz, 1664 to 1711, so second half of the 17th century, and he talks about the following. Um, He says, Tekiah is when you're at rest. The Teruah is kind of a sigh, the broken heart. It sounds like a cry, a wail. In fact, the debate um, in the Talmud about what is the true rendition of the Torah revolves around, what is a broken heart? How do people cry? Interesting discussion. With the one opinion was that people cry. It's kind of a series of long sighs. Oh, oi, oi. And then the other opinion is no, no, no. When a person is crying from a broken heart, when they're devastated, they're going, oi, 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 oi. And the third opinion is saying, no, no, it's actually a combination of the two side by side. So an expression of true grief, of broken heart would be, oi, 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 oi. So that's why we have three possibilities for how we actually produce that Teruah sound, and that ends up with a much longer service on Rosh Hashanah. If they could only have reached consensus and agreed on one of the three sounds, oh, would have been out of shul much earlier. But anyway, it is what it is, because all three opinions are deemed to be valid and possible true interpretations of what the Torah is telling us to do on that day, because of the importance of the Torah commandment, the biblical commandment of blowing shofar. We're going to do all the options. Now think, Yontif, when you're offering a sacrifice, it's the sounds of a community at rest. If you go into war, you want to go to war with a broken heart. You don't want to go cocksure. You want to be filled with teshuvah, closeness to Hashem, and you need to be on your toes. You need to be realizing that you're dependent on God's assistance, and humility is the key to getting God to go with you on the trip, and not arrogance. So that's the take of Melechet Machshavot of Moshe Ben Gershon. Um, and here we have an interpretation of the Oznaim LeTorah. His name was Zalman Ben Zion Sorotzkin. He actually, former contemporary, he died in 1966. And he actually wrote a beautiful commentary on the Torah called Oznaim LeTorah, which literally would mean ears of the Torah. But it's a classic. I'm looking here. No, I haven't got a copy in this room. I think it's in the book room on the outside. And he kind of um, similar twist. But he says Tekiah is a sound of victory. Um, Teruah is a sound of pressure and danger. It's very similar. Think going to war, or you're going out to a journey, the camps are moving, then we have the Teruah sound. Tekiah is the victorious sound. It's a sound of jubilation. And in fact, if we can just quickly sort of merge back to Rosh Hashanah, we always have the Tekiah, then the Teruah, and then the Tekiah, because we begin victorious. We begin with good times. We then move into the broken sounds of crying, and then we conclude again with the hope that things are going to be good all over again. So this is Oznaim LeTorah. And then there's a commentary called Ktav VeKabbalah. Um, and they're all kind of variations on the same interpretation. That is 18th or 17th, 18th, so 18th, 19th century Rabbi Yaakov Tzvi Mecklenburg, 1785, 1865. How does he put it? Tekiah is when you settled, and Teruah is transient. But what's beautiful is that he actually explains the etymology of those sounds, and that's why I found that was very interesting, even though it's very similar in the interpretation to the previous ones that we had. And when Jacob pitched his tent, it used the words Yaakov Taka Ohalo. I'm pretty sure I didn't have a chance to go look it up. I'm pretty sure that's when he was getting ready to war with Lavan. And it talked about, where each of them pitched their tents on the two sides of the hill. And the pitching of the tent, literally, he kind of fixed his tent, is Tekiah. You can see here the letters for Tekiah, Taf, Kuf, and Ayin, which are what we call the shoresh, or the root of the Hebrew word Tekiah, is somehow related to being fixed, pitching a tent, being in a very settled, permanent place. Contrast that with the word teruah, which is transience, which is the opposite of being settled. And this was, we're going to read about that next week in the Parsha, when the Jewish community is punished, and they're going to be wandering in the desert for 40 years. That's after the spies. Next week is a portion of Shlach. And Hashem says, your children, because your generation is going to, perish out, die out in the desert, and your children will have to be wandering in the desert for this entire period of time, the 40 years. And 40 years corresponded to the 40 days of that, very, very sad mission. And v'neichem ro'im bamidbar. So the word for wandering, transience, reish vav ayin, which we found here in the word teruah, reish, ayin, vav, not exactly, well, exactly in that order, reish, vav, ayin, which means the wandering in the desert, the lack of being settled. Now, that fits in very nicely with transience, which is traveling, or war, which is very uncertain times, and everyone being called to assembly outside the tent of assembly, or everyone coming on Yom Tov or Shabbos to bring sacrifices to the Holy Temple or to the Mishkan, and that's again the concept of being settled. Now here's a beautiful, I don't know how else to call it, vert. It's not a literal interpretation, because literally you have it in English. Well, they convoke the congregation, then you blow long blasts, not short ones. We had that verse early on in the description of the various sounds. It described which sounds are used on which occasions. So it clarified. It was the third verse, I think we read earlier. When you gather the congregation, then it's a Tekiah and not a Teruah. Okay. Commentaries tell us the following, and found in a number of books. When Hakil et Hakahal, when the congregation is congregated, in other words, when the congregation is a congregation, when they're united, then we have the promise that there will be long blasts and not short ones. Now, we know that long blasts is positive, and short blasts, that's always got a negative connotation, but beautifully, this interpretation of the verse, if you are united, you are kahal, you are a real congregation, then you'll have tekiah and not teruah, fits in with every one of the nuances of how we distinguish. If you're united, then you will have divine compassion and not divine judgment. If you are united, then you will enjoy rest, but not the broken heart and the sighing. And again, taking it to the next interpretation, you will experience victory, but will not be under pressure or danger. And finally, you'll be settled and you will not be in the transient state. So it's kind of beautiful that one interpretation of verse, which is not the literal interpretation, it's more the figurative, is actually one that carries through every single kind of deeper meaning, hidden meaning of the shofar. So here we have the trumpets that Moshe made, which were used either with a Tekiah sound or Teruah sound for assembly, for travel, for war, and to be blown on Shabbosim and Yom Tovim when we offered offerings. And all of these are All of these, are either with a Tekiah or a Teruah, respectively. Um, um, yeah, symbolizing um, symbolizing the various messages of Tekiah and Teruah, respectively.